I think if we assume that women have the right to happy and pleasurable sex lives, we wouldn't be arguing about access to birth control.
Is there any chance of your vision becoming reality?
No, and certainly not in the next 4 years.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbé. Welcome to the Contrary, normally a news and discussion show from diverse perspectives about issues in the news affecting women, families, and diverse communities. But we're continuing our series of one-on-one interviews for a change with female thought leaders in America. And today we have Jill Filipovic, who is a well-known blogger and women's rights advocate, and now out with her new book, which is The H-Spot, The Feminist Pursuit of Happiness. So I must tell you, my first reaction to the book was, I had no idea that the feminist movement was about sexual pleasure for women. It was more about equal rights in the workplace and that sort of thing. So explain how you came to that conclusion.
Sure. So the sexual pleasure component of it is only sort of one piece of what I'm talking about when I talk about a happiness and pleasure-centered feminism. The way that I came to the book is that I've been writing and reporting on women's rights for about a decade, and I found myself kind of again and again covering the same topics: sexual violence, abortion, access to birth control, balancing work and family, and often interviewing women at the points in their lives that were the most difficult or challenging. And it seemed to me, after sort of thinking through what are the kind of root causes of this sort of mass inequality that we see between women and men, that it wasn't just that women are treated differently, but that it was that our pleasure, our happiness, and the way that we want to live our lives wasn't taken seriously and isn't the sort of foundational building block of our society. So in the book, I was curious to interrogate the question of what it would look like if women got to be the ones to build the system. If instead of just trying to make ourselves equal to men, we asked the question, what would make us happy? What would a feminist pursuit of happiness look like? What would we build if we had the tools?
So are you saying that the workplace in particular was built obviously by men, because although there were always women in it, and often African American workers in very low level jobs just to make ends meet, that they built it in a way that it made them happy, or it just kind of happened that way?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. In the sort of Declaration of Independence, there's the line about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But who was entitled to that pursuit was a pretty narrow group of people, right? It was landowning white men. And the way that our laws, policies, institutions, including our workplaces, have been built since then, have really focused on, if not like the day-to-day happiness of those men, at least giving them the capacity to pursue it. So you have women, white middle-class women at home as invisible partners. You have African-American and increasingly Latina women in the workforce, but it's kind of low-wage and low-skilled labor.
Right, dominating. The women are two-thirds
exactly.
of all minimum wage earners.
Right. And so you have this system that essentially makes it easier for this same group of white men to succeed the same way they did 220 years ago. So my argument is not necessarily that every man is happy and that we've created a system in which all men get to be happy all the time. The argument is that we've set up a system that at least gives men a disproportionate ability to pursue that happiness, to seek knowledge, to seek identity, and to seek fulfillment. And that we've slotted women into the roles of these kind of invisible laborers supporting that system.
You talk about government solutions to this problem. Tell me how you think government should get into the realm of feminist goals for women.
Sure. So some governments, not the U.S., do actually take happiness into account when they're making laws. Many of these governments are places in Scandinavia, right, which from an American feminist perspective are like feminist Disneyland. The U.S. does not. But from my perspective, I think if we took pleasure and happiness into account, a lot of our more kind of intractable political battles would cease to be relevant. I think if we assume that women have the right to happy and pleasurable sex lives, we wouldn't be arguing about access to birth control. I think if we agreed that motherhood shouldn't just be about sacrifice, but should also be about pleasure and getting to spend time with your children, and also if you choose to forge an individual identity at work, I don't think we'd be arguing about paid family leave.
But bringing sexual pleasure into it, does that hurt or help feminism? Because clearly the Christian right and the far right in the Republican Party are already so afraid of sex, and they don't want abortions. Now they are getting to they don't want birth control for women. If you start talking about women's happiness during sexual pleasure, don't you think you'll scare off more people than you'll win over?
I think we'll scare off some people. But I think as a movement for social justice and equality, the goal can't be who are we going to alienate. The goal has to be what is our big vision for what we want? What do women's rights look like? What does our happiness and our power look like? And I think if you take sexuality out of that, that's such a fundamental part of all of our lives, whether we're sexually active or not. It's how the human race propagates itself. And so many of our political battles and so much of what underlies discrimination that women face is very much vested in our ideas about sex, both sex roles, but also sex itself and sexual pleasure and attraction. And so I don't think you can push that to the side just because you're afraid of alienating the religious right. To me, that says you need to put that more in the forefront and put forward a really positive feminist vision. And then hopefully you'll get more people over to your side.
But in this era where we have a Republican in the White House, we have Republican-controlled Congress, is there any chance of your vision becoming reality?
No, and certainly not in the next 4 years. But I do think that as many of us who are not 100% behind this current president or this current administration, I think as we're being part of this anti-Trump resistance, as we are pushing back on laws that constrain women's rights, it's really crucial not to just be reactive and to just say, no, we're not doing this, no, we don't want this, no, don't pass this law. I think we also are tasked with putting forward our own vision of what a good life looks like and of what America looks like. And I think in creating that kind of proactive and positive vision that hopefully we can all kind of keep our eye on, keeping women's happiness at the center of that is really crucial as kind of an alternative to what Trump is offering us.
Women's happiness and women's well-being, certainly, but to ask the government to intervene to help women's sexual pleasure, is that really, will that ever, regardless of which administration, the Obama administration probably would not have pursued that as a goal.
I'm sure they would not put it in those terms. And I wouldn't expect politicians to frame it in exactly the same way as I do. But I actually think there's quite a good kind of traditional argument for this, right? If you are a conservative Republican, you want to see marriages thrive and you want to see people have more stable, intimate relationships. One of the ways you do that is you give people the space to plan their families so that they don't have disruption in their marriages. And you give people the space to bond and to have the kind of intimate interaction that is really necessary to make a marriage thrive. In order to have that, you have to have time. If you're working 3 minimum wage jobs, you're probably not going to have a lot of time to spend any kind of intimate moments with your partner. You need time off after you have a child. You need, obviously, birth control access to be able to plan your families. A lot of these pieces, if you frame them the right way, can actually really, I think, appeal to most Americans for whom a lot of this stuff is common sense.
The Atlantic magazine says the H-Spot argues for a movement that de-emphasizes women's equality and focuses instead on their fulfillment. Equality versus happiness and pleasure. I'm not sure exactly what the Atlantic said about explaining why you say that you de-emphasize equality, but respond to that criticism, please.
Sure. So I'm certainly not saying that equality isn't important. I'm a feminist. I want women to be equal to men. I think the feminist movement has done incredible work on behalf of American women, and I think we're still incredibly strong and moving forward. For me, the question is not, do you pick equality or happiness? The question is, what does our goal look like? Is our goal just to make us equal to men in a system built by and for men? Or is our goal to undermine some of these institutions and laws and policies that have been built by men and for men, and that I frankly don't think we're ever going to be equal in?
Which institutions are you talking about?
I am talking about the way that our workplaces are set up, the way that even our tax code is set up, and how we value certain relationships over others and certain family constructions over others. We've structured our society in a way that confers great unearned benefits onto a pretty small group of mostly male people. And so what I would like to see the feminist movement do is obviously, yes, keep working on making us equal, but also question the foundations of it and see if we can start rebuilding some of these things from the ground up to reflect what women need and want in our lives.
Is the goal having laws that make us equal to men, or just remove the barriers that still stand, the sexism, which some women of color have said now that sexism is worse than racism in this country? So removing the barriers to equality as opposed to making women equal.
I guess I think it's both. And I don't know that you can really have one without the other. Of course, we have to remove barriers to equality. And, the feminist movement, I think rightly, started by dismantling laws that treated women unequally. We've done that part, and that's a big and important part. I think the next step is not just removing these barriers, but asking, what are we removing the barrier to? I mean, what is the structure here? Who made it? Who does it benefit? Whose life and, life experiences it reflect? I mean, we see what's going on right now with the health care bill, and that every senator charged with the revision of this bill is a man. Well, do you think a group of white, wealthy, older men really understand the healthcare challenges of the whole rest of the American people? I don't think they do. And so not only...
What do you think about, I'd like your reflections on the House version of the bill anyway, eliminates coverage of maternity. So they take away abortion, they take away birth control, and thank you now if you do get pregnant, which we need women to get pregnant in this country, some of them anyway. We need a next generation. And now we're gonna take away, everything from you, and you have the right to pay $17,000 on average for your own pregnancy and birth.
Right. I mean, well, this to me is really illustrative of what happens not only when you don't have women in the room, but also when the baseline assumption is that what men experience in their lives is universal and normal. I think if we had an assumption
But don't they understand that they would want their own wives' maternity benefits covered in their health plan?
Sure, and I would guess that they will give themselves a health plan that will cover those benefits. Congressmen have the ability to do that for themselves, even if they don't want to do it for the rest of the American people.
On another topic, in the book you talk a lot about a woman named Janet Rowland. Why is her story so central to the book?
So Janet is someone I met when I was working for Cosmopolitan. I was doing a piece about the minimum wage, and I interviewed her because she was a worker who was making just above the minimum wage. She lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with her 3 children. She's a single mom. And Janet is somebody for whom life has just kind of handed a bunch of punches. She was a foster kid. She was abused as a child. She, as an adult, was the victim of domestic violence. One of her exes is currently in prison for beating her quite badly. Every time that she seems to be about to crawl to something close to stability, something bad befalls her. Her benefits get cut off, and then she gets evicted. She finds mold in her home, which she then has to wipe out her meager savings to try and pay to clear out. And when I interviewed her for Cosmo, I was asking her about the kind of values she instills in her children, and what she teaches her kids. And she told me this story, and Janet's young, Janet's 28. And she told me the story about how every Christmas, she doesn't make enough money to really make ends meet, and she certainly doesn't make enough money to buy her kids toys and fun presents for Christmas. She borrows money from friends to buy them the basics, shoes, school clothes, books. And then she goes to Toys for Tots to get a few other toys. But she says every year, her favorite part of Christmas is not when the kids open up their presents, but it's that she has each of them go to their rooms just before Christmas and find one thing that they want to give to a kid who's less fortunate. And that as a family, they bring these gifts and then they donate them to a homeless shelter or to any sort of other toys or for kids program. And when I was talking to her, she was saying, it's so important for me to make them realize, like, I had my first daughter and we were living in a homeless shelter. Now we have a house, we have shoes, we have clothes, it's stressful, but look at how blessed we are. Look at how much we have. And here's this person who has faced a lot of challenges, is not perfect, has not done everything right, but has done about as much right or wrong as kind of your average American woman. And yet still she really can't get a leg up. She's trapped in this cycle of poverty and violence. And to me, her story was really important because it's not, you'll often hear that story kind of caricatured, right? Where either she's this kind of innocent victim or she's, a black single mother who's very easy, I think, especially for people on the right, to kind of hold up as some sort of moral failure. The reality is she's, a complex person with a complex set of challenges. And she also seemed to me to be kind of a good illustration of the various problems that American women face.
So tell me what those are.
Sure. So, she's somebody who is working quite hard, right? She works several minimum wage jobs. But she's still not able to save. She certainly wasn't able to go to college. She's barely able to provide for her children. If she takes full-time work, she makes just too much money to receive any government benefits. So she's constantly living right on the edge of poverty.
So what should the government be doing for her?
Well, first of all, I'd love to see the government just have a stronger and more robust social safety net. It doesn't seem to me that anyone who is working and is trying to provide for their families should be living on the cusp of constant poverty. We have a crisis of affordable housing in this country. I think something like only 1 in 4 people who actually would qualify for affordable housing lives in affordable housing. That's something that could make a huge difference in her life. Decent health care could make a huge difference in her life, including psychological and mental health care. She obviously is depressed. This is sort of not difficult to understand why. And so many, I think, so much of the way that we talk about things like welfare or even, policies around healthcare and contraception, is very much stuck in this kind of like white upper class person's idea of what someone on welfare looks like and thinks like and acts like. And requires I think a level of kind of superhuman goodness to feel like, that person is entitled to receive government benefits. And then B, I think doesn't totally take into account the various factors that undermine a person's ability to sort of maintain a basic level of stability.
Give me a quick list, if you will. What are those factors?
So, the first factor is that if she gets injured and has to miss work, she can lose her job. If she's sick and has to miss work, if one of her kids are sick, she works a low-wage job with no job security.
No benefits, I assume.
And no benefits, right. Because when you work those low-wage jobs, nobody wants to employ you full-time because that way they don't have to give you those benefits. She lives in a neighborhood that, despite having some neighbors who are really great and supportive and help each other out, is also plagued by crime and violence. So she feels like it's not a safe place to raise her children. And she doesn't feel like it's a safe place for her to go outside or to exercise. She doesn't get adequate health care. So she often finds herself putting off doctor's appointments, putting off appointments with her therapist, trying to save money or time by really shorting herself and her own health care.
Are you worried about her pleasure factor, or is it really more just getting her above the level of poverty so she can live a somewhat normal life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of part of why I found her story so compelling, is because despite all of the barriers that she is up against, of course, if I say to her, Janet, do you want gas for your car or do you want to be happy? She's going to say, I want gas for my car.
Please tell me briefly about her dream and why she can't achieve it.
Sure. So Janet's big dream is to open a domestic violence shelter. This isn't something she's going to be able to do until all of her most basic needs are met. Obviously, the way that our government is structured right now, her most basic needs are certainly not even being met, not by the private sector, and not by the public one either. And so that to me is why I think it's valuable to focus on pleasure and happiness, not just to say that somebody like Janet deserves only to not die of starvation or exposure, but that she also deserves to pursue what she feels is her great purpose in life.
And last question, I want to start with the beginning of the book, where you talk about the history of feminism. And again, reading it, I always thought that feminism was about getting rid of laws that work against women, equal pay, Title IX, Title X, all the major federal laws that were written in the mainly 60s and 70s, the Pregnancy Non-Discrimination Act, those sorts of things. But you talk about, with birth control, an initial goal, Margaret Sanger, building up, making birth control accessible to women, and building up to the point in 1960 with the premiere of the pill, that really sexual pleasure was a goal of the feminists. And I've never heard it discussed that way. Explain it to me and to our audience.
Sure. So, one of the goals, not just of Margaret Sanger, but of a lot of feminists, was that sex shouldn't be a thing that was only fearful. And I think Sanger was very focused on kind of the negative health impacts, right, of high rates of unintended pregnancy and then very, very high rates of unsafe clandestine abortions. But I think they were also interested in this idea that sex wasn't just a thing for men. And that for women, getting to control the number and spacing of your children was obviously not just good for your own physical health, but also could make you a better partner. It could make your life better. I think you see the feminist movement.
Where do you see them saying this, though?
Sorry. So I guess this is more in sort of like 1960s and 70s feminism, which neatly dovetailed pretty well with the sexual revolution. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, you did have a real focus on things like dismantling laws that put women in a different position as men. But you also had a lot of second wave feminist writing on the importance of women understanding their bodies, what our bodies ourselves, which did in great detail talk about pleasure women receive from their own sexualities and their own bodies. So this was very much, and has been very much, part and parcel to the feminist movement.
So how does that inform what you suggest in the book, which is essentially getting to the point of government procedures, government programs to help women not just become financially stable and have the same access to capital and the access to the ability to succeed as men do, but also that government policy should be devoted toward women's sexual pleasure?
Sure. So, I think that government policy should be devoted to kind of our happiness and pleasure very broadly, including our rights to have fulfilling and happy sex lives. And I guess the sort of big hope that I have for the book is not that people are going to read it and we're going to go around the same kind of gerbil wheel debates of, paid family leave or childcare, or the kind of list of typical kind of liberal democratic voting wants. I hope we get all of those things too. But to me, the more interesting question is when we reframe what the sort of role of government is in helping to buoy women's happiness. What kind of policies do we want to see? What are we not talking about? What are the kind of not even pie in the sky, but what are the things that we haven't even really considered yet because we've been thinking solely within this kind of very traditional framework? And so what I hope is that people will read the book and, of course, will be behind the kind of laundry list of policies that feminists have long advocated for. But that folks will come up with more innovative and interesting solutions that would sort of take us out of this just catching women up to where men are view, and figuring out ways to kind of underwrite the various things that make women happy in our lives.
What do you think, in closing, what do you think is the most important? Do you think women around the country are feeling like feminists should be helping me achieve orgasm, or are they thinking about other things?
Yeah, so I think sex and sexuality is one important component of it, but, it's one chapter of the book, and it's one component of our lives. I do think what women are hopeful for, what I hope that they will be hopeful for after they read this book, is a feminism that doesn't just help them to play catch up, but that takes seriously how they live, what they want, and offers a new framework for achieving a set of policy goals that will help improve their lives overall.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
good
much.
luck with your book. Thanks for watching. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Erbé or at To the Contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next week.